Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Anjali Tandon, Associate Professor at ISID. I'm the moderator for today's research seminar series. Today, we have a presentation by our colleague, Dr. Rama Arun Kumar, followed by a panel of 3 discussants. And I can see 2 of our discussants are already with us online. I'm sure we'll have the third one with us any moment. I just want to check with Rama, how much time do you think you need? 30 to 40 minutes? Is that fine with you?
Yes, that would be.
Okay, so we set about 30 to 40 minutes for Dr. Rama for a presentation, which will be followed by about 10 to 12 minutes of discussion by each of our 3 panelists, and then leaving some room for the presenter to respond and maybe some more questions on the floor. If that is okay, we get going with Dr. Rama's presentation. Dr. Rama Arun Kumar is an assistant professor at the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development. Today, she has chosen to share her research findings with us on import liberalization impacting Indian domestic manufacturing. So, Rama, you have the floor, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali.
Sorry, 1 second, Rama. Doctor, I have a request to Dr. Anjali, if you can call Professor Manmohan Agarwal and check that if he is facing any problem.
Do you want me to phone call him?
Better.
He's not online. Yeah, he's not online.
I'll do that. I'll turn my video audio off and Rama, please, you can start if you know.
So I hope my PPT is visible to all.
Yes, Rama, we can see that.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rama Arun Kumar. I'm going to be sharing work in progress, you can say, on the impact of import liberalization on Indian manufacturing sector. So this study was basically taken up in the course of doing some, consultations with the Ministry of Commerce that, we got to investigate what industries were actually could be the potential industries to be targeted for having self-reliance in. And, that was the trigger that I had to start this study. And I thank Dr. Nagesh for guiding me and, putting me through this kind of, work that I've done for a number of years. But, this was something pending on my mind. So I thought I'll take it up. So when we talk about the present scenario of the world being interlinked with a lot of supply chains, the pandemic actually, a recent pandemic had brought to the fore how these supply chains can get adversely affected, and they were affected all over the world and across various sectors, not just the crucial sectors like pharmaceuticals and other important essential commodities, but even otherwise the overall supply chains were disrupted. And therefore, there is actually a need for introspecting this phenomenon. So that is a broader, framework from where we can, I started thinking that what kind of industries were majorly affected during the course of import liberalization. So this is not, a study on post-COVID impact, but that phenomenon itself having the inherent element of vulnerability of supply chains being so enmeshed with each other across the globe, that it actually brought to the fore how liberalization in particular to Indian industry has impacted industrialization process as such. So, that is the basis on which my study would be based. And liberalization process has been there since, late 1980s, in sort of a scattered way. But after 1991, when India had the trouble of the balance of payment and the fiscal deficit, the twin deficit that we call, there was a full-fledged liberalization policy in place, and a lot of sectors came into under the ambit of the liberalization process. Apart from the other reforms that were a part of this economic reforms. But the import liberalization or trade liberalization, if we can just call it that for the moment, that opened the gates for a lot of opportunities to come in terms of access to global markets and access of Indian industries to global and cheaper or better inputs for our own industrialization, industrial base. However, import protection policy that was, the liberalization policy could be said that they didn't have that kind of expected effect on strengthening the industrial base of India. And some of the studies or literature, this may not be, complete list of literature, but after reading a lot of papers, there was a need for investigating further how these industries were actually affected. And the import protection policy that India was following in the early years of industrialization was actually, kind of kind of an sort boost or support for industrialization process that has happened even in the now developed countries. So some of the examples being US, UK, Japan, where selectively a lot of protectionist policy was followed when the now developed economies were following at that time. So, that didn't happen for India for a very long time because of the other problems that we had in hand. And overall, the industrialization process, which should have, come up through the dynamics of trade and industrial policies, was not visible in Indian industry case. And so even in the the short term, if we I started thinking of the short term and the long term effects. So this is just based on the data. If we take cue from the rationale for the planning process and the economic reforms harping on adaptability with the needs of the fast changing situation in the country, that kind of structural change that India could have achieved to do away with the major obstacles to gain higher economic development levels was not visible in the short term. And if we consider the long term, we'll have more clarity. But just to give a flavor, the Human Development Index for India did not grow much in the first 10 to 15 years. And the economic growth also, GDP growth rate, was hardly, from 5.9 to 6.1 over a period of, 10 years, if we take some of the averages. So, this is a macro look at the period that was supposed to bring about a change in the economic development and economic growth. If we look at the long-term effect in terms of the impact on trade liberalization not only led to trade deficit issue remaining intact, I would say, and escalating over a period of time, as you can see in the graph. So these are trends in imports and exports as a percentage of GDP for India. But the more crucial question and the more concerning issue was the detrimental impact on industrialization process of India. So, this is what the focus of the paper would be, that how the impact of liberalization that could have, generated industrialization process to be boosted was not seen at a very disaggregated industry level. So there have been many sectoral studies which have pointed out on the impact of the growing import dependence, or I would say the grown import dependence now on the process of industrialization in India. So, in a very small paper on the incense sticks imports from China, and our own study in ISID that we had done on pharmaceuticals, Dr. Reggie and myself, we had also found out that there was a lot of, the high import dependence of India was actually impacting the domestic production. So, these are some examples of how, that could not be translated into our own benefit. The path of liberalization that India took was in terms mainly of tariff changes and non-tariff barrier reductions. Some of them were unilateral in nature, and they were happening. This is not like economic reforms that something was happening at one point of time. This was in phases that was happening, and it was, some of them were multilateral, some of them were unilateral, they were sectoral in nature, and also a sort of imposition on India. So these are some of the path or the changes that India was had embarked upon over a period of time. So there was an overall reduction in peak import tariff rates. There was a difference in the average tariff rates of for agricultural and non-agricultural products. There were tariff reductions under the free trade agreements. So one way was the for the entire globe that you are bringing down the MFN tariff rates. But there were also free trade agreements bilaterally and regionally that we were giving out in terms of trade in the form of trade agreements. In the case of non-tariff barriers, the reduction in the or the elimination of quantitative restrictions happened also for a number of products. I'll come to that. And other protection measures that still are in place, but they only impact a very small subset of products, and they are not sustained over a period of time. So they keep changing, they keep coming back to normal or back to where they were. So these are only transitory changes like tariff protection measures, safeguard measures, SPS and TBT measures. So I'm not very I'll not go deeper into making you sort of conversant with these measures, but these are the forms in which India was giving way for liberalization to happen. So if we take a peek at the data, so the peak rate tariff rates, duties, over a period of time, they came down to from 150 to 10 in 2007. So a period of 15 to 17 years saw a massive reduction in the tariff rates. And the other thing that I had mentioned before also, so there was a difference within the economy in terms of the agricultural and non-agricultural manufactured products tariff rates. So the agricultural tariff rates were higher and manufacturing was much lower than the agricultural tariff rates. And there was a reason behind it. I might not be, it might not be a comprehensive reasoning, but the 1986 Uruguay round converted all the non-tariff measures in agricultural products to tariff equivalents. And thereby the tariffs on the agricultural goods, they increased. And at the same time, there was there was a WTO BOP dispute that was raised by the US in the WTO forum, dispute settlement forum, and India had against India that India should actually remove the quantitative restrictions on 1,400 odd products, which it had, which were mostly in the small scale sector and the MSME of today. So because of the India lost that case, India had to remove the QRs much before time. So it was 2003 that it had time for, and 99 by 2000 we had to start removing in phases. So by 2001 we had got out of that kind of restriction also. So even that protection was lost. In addition, tariffs were also reduced following the loss of case. So, this is something which is not well documented, but it has been mentioned in a study which, translated into India, spilling over to other industries also in terms of reducing the trade barriers in the manufactured products. In terms of the free trade agreements, so I'll just take one example of ASEAN FTA. And, if you look at, if one can see from the data, the tariff elimination was around 74% for under the ASEAN India FTA. So India completely eliminated the tariffs for 74% of the total commodities or the total products. And tariff reduction was happening in 15%, and exclusion list was 10%. So no tariff reduction was there for 10% or almost 11% of the total commodities. So this was the extent of liberalization happening under the FTAs. Some of the FTAs I have listed here. It's not a comprehensive list, just to see the flavor, feel the flavor of how India was liberalizing. And there are studies which have shown that India actually has lost out in terms of these FTAs, particular FTAs like ASEAN and Republic of Korea. And therefore, there is again an evidence of the high trade deficit that I was mentioning in the beginning, that India had basically not caught up to the very rationale of the reforms that we were having. In terms of quantitative restrictions, these are just data for the updated since 2008. This has been taken from Global Trade Alert. I forgot to mention the source. So India has anti-dumping duties, 131 anti-dumping duties, safeguards 5, and other measures of like import tariff quota. But these are, again, as I mentioned, the coverage of it is very less, so only a few products. So just for having on record that these measures also persist. So let me come to now to the industry scenario for India. So when we talk of data, the data availability of trade is at the product level, and the industry level data is basically in the classified under the industry codes, which is the National Industry Classification. And in 2020, I had done a paper whereby I had concorded the NIC 4-digit level and HS 6-digit level products, and tried to see, how the trade data and the industry data could be studied. So using that concordance, we have 124 sectors or industries at NIC 4-digit level. So I've sourced the data for trade from DGCIS, tariff data from UN Comtrade, industry data from the annual survey of industries for the manufacturing sector. So this is the formal manufacturing sector we are talking about. So then the way this study goes about, starting with the concept of how import liberalization had affected. So there is a concept of import surge, which is well defined, but the measurement of import surge varies from one study to another. So, I would like to, justify why we use import surge, because increase in imports, one may argue that, import liberalization has, impacted positively on the GDP or on other macro measures. But, the translation of it might not be uniform across industries, because it's a very heterogeneous category, or the heterogeneous pool of industries that we are talking about. So per se, increase in the imports is not an issue for the industry if it does not lead to an injury caused by the imports due to the impairment of the domestic production. So if that increase in the imports is such that the domestic production or the domestic manufacturers in that sector are adversely affected, gets into then it gets into problematic area, or a problem of a concern that one needs to address. So according to the agreement on safeguards under the WTO, Article 19 of GATT defines serious injury caused by imports of a product. So we are talking right now about the product as per the definition, as the significant impairment in the position of domestic industry. And this act enables countries to investigate and evaluate all the relevant factors, and then finalize or kind of come up with the impact that actually the import surge has caused on the domestic output. And it follows that the raising of barriers is possible for that particular product. But that is not that's not what I want to say. The conceptualization of import surge is an important thing too, because that is the starting point for this study. So that's why understanding import surge is important. The other thing is of the measurement. So the measurement is so one can say this is just a pictorial thing that I wanted to clarify, that rising imports are not a problem, but when they convert or transform into an import surge and cause an injury to the domestic industries in terms of employment loss, output reduction, affect the productivity, etc., capacity utilization, that becomes there is a need to identify these kind of injuries or and take corrective actions thereby. In terms of measurement, there is no defined way of identifying or measuring this kind of surge. But having read the WTO documents and a lot of other literature, whereby a lot of researchers have investigated or tried to measure this kind of surge, we've taken two steps to identify the NIC 4-digit level sectors where the import surge was actually visible. So the first step is that we consider a period of 5 years to compare the rise in the import values for all industries at the NIC 4-digit level. The trigger point for import surge is where the imports have doubled or more than doubled with a persistent rise thereafter. So this is a threshold that we have taken, that wherever the quinquennially it is doubling, the first doubling is taken as the trigger point, and thereby the persistent rise is also observed. If it is observed, then it is it becomes a potential sector for import surge. The second filter that we have applied is among these industries, those industries with very high imports to domestic production ratios have been identified. So so now the impact on domestic production also comes into play, and those industries where the import domestic production ratios have been very high in the recent years. So that takes care of a lot of the time period also, and the changes happening over time. And in order to classify the industries, the classification that the study uses is based on the use-based classification. So the primary, intermediate, consumer, and capital goods. So when we take that classification, so this is very basic data that I've taken. So the graph shows the number of industry, the distribution basically of the number of industries with the as compared to the imports. So the highest imports in terms of value, which is happening, is basically concentrated in the consumer goods and durables and non-durable goods sector, followed by intermediate and capital goods sector. And within that, the lower bar or the smaller bar that you can see are the number of industries where, or the sectors which were identified with an import surge using the filters that we have applied. So one can start seeing the distribution from the distribution, that it is more on the consumer durable or non-durable sector, which was actually under a very high import surge, given that the share also in the imports was very high, and the impact that it can be that can be followed is through this figure, which shows the import shares in total imports of India according to this classification. So we have the various classifications. One can see, I've just highlighted the consumer durable goods sector, which actually witnessed an increase in the import share over time, and it has remained high all through. So there was a impact in this particular section of the industries, and that again is a matter of concern, because one can say that intermediate goods and capital goods, which are essential inputs for the industrialization process, having access to these better intermediate goods and capital goods might be beneficial. But consumer goods sector is something which is the finished products. So when one sees finished products being the domestic production being replaced by these the high import due to the high import dependence, that's where the thinking starts. So just to have a comparison in terms of the technology classification, I have taken the OECD classification, which is the graph shows that the increase in the imports was mostly or very steeply increasing in the medium high technology and the medium low technology industries, and also the high technology. So the composition was more towards the medium high technology industries. So this is just to have a flavor of the technology oriented technology based goods that we were importing. When we compare this with domestic production, so what I've done, as already mentioned, I've taken the import to domestic production ratio, and the third column that you can see, the last column, basically is these industries are being selected, taking this ratio from 0.5 and above. So those industries with 0.5 and above import output ratio have been selected, and under the capital goods, if we can see the magnitude, if we just compare the imports to the output, the domestic output that was generated in these sectors, one can see that in the case of optical instruments and photographic equipment, the the ratio was 27 in 27, meaning that imports were 27 times more than the output being generated. So this is the recent most data that we have taken. Likewise, the other industries in the capital goods sector. So this gives us an indication that actually the capture of the domestic market was a very high in certain set of subset of industries. So one can, if we just look at the composition, office machinery and equipment, textile, apparel and leather production, medical and dental instruments, hand tools, etc. So these are industries which were very highly dependent on imports. In the consumer durable sector, we have the games and toys sector, which is another interesting sector, which is being I'm doing some study on that also. So this was identified as the sectors where imports had surged over a period of time and remained significantly high as compared to the domestic production. So musical instruments, computers, electronics, consumer electronics, sports goods, again, a sector which lost out heavily during this import liberalization. These are the intermediate goods. Again, the electronic components feature basic chemicals. So some of the industries that are in the high import surge as well as the high import category. Some of the indicative factors for import surge were, one of the quantitative measures is tariffs. So I just compared the tariff data for the subset of the highly import oriented or import dependent sectors so identified in the analysis. And we get to see, particularly for the consumer durables industry, that the highly import dependent sectors had very low tariff rates as compared to the overall average of the consumer durable goods sector. So, but that story is not very keenly observed in the other sectors or other classifications. But definitely for the consumer goods sector, there was a clear, indication that the, bringing down of tariffs was visible in, having an impact on the domestic production. But, there are other factors also, but which we'll see in the study. In terms of the employment, the economic inclusion, or one can say if it led to exclusion of the effect of the higher tariffs or higher import liberalization, lower tariffs or import liberalization overall, we can see that in the consumer goods sector, the very high import sectors identified, they actually witnessed a fall in employment and stagnation there onwards. A similar story was seen in case of the high import sectors in the intermediate, which witnessed a stagnation of about 3.3 to 3.6% of the total employment. And there was a declining share in the overall sector of the capital goods, which was visible. So the observations I've just enumerated is based on this graph. For the consumer goods, one can see that the level of employment has been stagnant over a period of time. In terms of in the case of intermediate goods and in case of capital goods also, there has been a fluctuation overall, but stagnation in terms of employment. So having this, discuss the data analysis, I've just tried to do some empirical estimations to establish this observation or assertion through the data analysis that I've done. So in order to investigate the impact, the level of employment has been chosen as an indicator of industrialization and using the panel data for 2008 to 2018, we have taken all the NIC 4-digit level sectors and checked the impact of trade liberalization through the import penetration ratio, import output ratio, and also tariffs. So these are separate equations that we have taken. And the subset of separate equations for the use-based industries have also been checked for. So this is the result of the econometric estimations that we have done. So I would just summarize the results if we have sufficient time. So the summary or the main observations from this empirical estimations are that the impact of import penetration ratio was found to be negative and statistically significant for the subset of those consumer goods industries which were identified having very high import output ratios. So from the subsets that I had mentioned in the earlier analysis, it was visible that import penetration ratios being very high had a negative impact on the employment levels in these sectors. The other variables that we have taken was capital intensity. So this is a very recent, result that I'm sharing. So it's not very well tabulated. So just inserted the some of the results. So capital intensity had a negative effect in these the subset of these industries. So again, one can see that the higher capital intensity is having a negative impact on employment. So which is according to the economic theory. For checking the robustness of the results, we have obtained, we have used the variables instead of the import penetration, the tariffs and import output ratio, which again gave the similar results on the adverse effect of industrial employment particularly in the consumer goods sector, where the imports surge was visible and as measured from the analysis was very high. So in conclusion, industrial growth across the world has been supported by, so I'm just, it isn't, conclusion is a very strong word for my study, but, the need for change of the outlook towards certain industries is what, I would focus on in terms of concluding my research. So as the paper has observed a negative impact on the industrialization, there is a need for changing the trade policy towards protecting the employment intensive sectors or having a focused strategy in terms of trade and industrial policy, particularly in those sectors where a major segment is in the MSME manufacturing sector. And a strategic sectoral approach, therefore, is needed for industries or products to charter targeted policies. So I thank you and hope to have reached, explain my methodology and the objective of the paper quite clearly for the panelists and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rama, for sticking to the time and bringing out your points very clearly. Your presentation brings forth the challenges of Indian manufacturing employment, particularly in the consumer goods segment, which accounts for about 12 to 13% of the manufacturing basket through the slashing of tariffs over time. With this, I would now like to switch to our panel, and we have three distinguished panels. I'll introduce each one of them as I invite them for their comments. As per the schedule, the first panelist today is Professor Abhijit Das. Few lines of introduction for Professor Das. Professor Das brings on the panel with him a wide experience in research, policy making, and bureaucracy. Professor Das has been formerly the head at the Center for WTO Studies at the IIFT Delhi. His earlier positions include those at the UNCTAD India program and at the Trade Policy Division in the Commerce Ministry, where he served as the director. Sir, I invite you for your discussion on the paper. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali Tandon. Thank you for inviting me to be a panelist. And Rama, thanks a lot for taking up this challenge of investigating a very, very important topic. I think you've done a tremendous job, and whatever my comments are, they are aimed at trying to make sure that your paper is more robust. So first and foremost, as I said, this is a perennial question. Did India's trade liberalization over the years, not necessarily 1991 as the marker, did India's trade liberalization result in an adverse impact on employment? That's a very, very important question. And through your paper, you've tried to give us some answers. While I would generally accept your conclusion, let me make a few observations. First and foremost, when you talk of increase in imports and import surges, you try to make a distinction between the two. And in your case, your distinction is when the imports have doubled. You also mentioned that import surge is a well-defined concept. Actually, import surge is not a well-defined concept to the best of my mind. During the Uruguay round, when the agreement on safeguards was being negotiated, a lot of negotiating hours were spent in trying to define what could constitute an import surge. And for very good reasons, the negotiators could not come to any definitive conclusion. Whether a 2% increase in imports in value or quantity terms is import surge, or whether it will be 20% increase, or whether it will be doubling. So I would like to urge caution over there when you come up with a very definitive statement that import surge is well defined. The reason is not very far to seek. In certain sectors, let's say wearing apparel, maybe a 5 to 10% change in prices or increase in quantity might not really cause any adverse damage or might not be relevant for an import surge. Whereas, let's say in a sector which is much more price sensitive, then even a 2 or a 5% change in import quantity or value might have more impact on the domestic production. So the short message which I'm trying to drive home is that for good reasons, import surge cannot be well defined. And so all that you need to say is that you've taken import surge to imply a doubling of imports. I presume that is what you've done. Then when you refer to the agreement on safeguards, again, for a bit of conceptual clarity there, import surge and serious injury, these are two separate concepts. Import surge has to exist, serious injury has to exist, and then there has to be a causal link. It doesn't mean that if there is serious injury, then the increase in imports which happened, that was import surge. No, that is not the intention. Import surge is one element, and serious injury, which can be manifested through parameters such as declining domestic share, declining domestic employment, etc. So serious injury is a separate concept. Now, the jurisprudence, what it tells us is that import surge will be recognized when there is a sudden increase in imports. The import increase is very sharp, very significant, and recent. So the 4 criteria which WTO jurisprudence has evolved to determine whether there is an import surge or not are these 4. RSS. Then coming to a point which you have mentioned, why is this import to output ratio at 0.5% sacrosanct? Why isn't it 0.4%? Why isn't it 0.6%? I think there needs to be some explanation of it. And linked to that issue is important. I think that is the central, if I can say, a bit of a weakness in the paper. If the domestic production is unable to meet the rising domestic demand, you are bound to have import surges. And those import surges need not necessarily displace domestic labor. A good illustration of that came out in your slide itself when you mentioned about the very high import to output ratio in respect of aircraft and related machinery. Clearly, India does not have a vibrant domestic industry of either of the two, although in recent years we have now started manufacturing some parts and components which go into aircraft. But very clearly, there the domestic demand is much, much higher than our domestic production, and hence naturally we have to be import dependent. So I would request you to address that question. Now, why that question becomes really important is in the context of products that were covered under the Information Technology Agreement, ITA. You have referred to the ITA, and in fact, if you do a special focus on ITA products itself and delve a bit deeper, I think the utility and the value of your research will be enhanced n number of times, because that is one area where it was a very conscious policy decision that was voluntary, that was really not mandated. Government took that voluntary policy decision, and very clearly, as you've shown, there is a adverse impact on employment. But then the question to address over there is the following. Was domestic demand rising much, much faster than the domestic production, than the growth in domestic production? That is what some people have been speculating. Very clearly, the domestic producers lost substantial market share in the total domestic demand. But was the loss in market share on account of their inability to compete with imports, or was it on account of insufficient domestic capacity and inability of the domestic producers to expand capacity? I think if you can delve into that question and come up with some pointers, that will be very, very useful. One or two further queries and comments. When you've taken tariffs, I presume you've taken MFN tariffs. And I also presume that you've not considered free trade agreements explicitly in your model. For the sake of completeness, I would like to point out two very specific aspects here. One, of course, goes beyond completeness, is about accuracy. You mentioned in the agriculture sector about need to convert non-tariff measures into tariff equivalents in the agriculture sector. Now, that was the general rule for all countries. As far as India is concerned, we didn't maintain any non-tariff measures which required to be converted into tariff equivalents. So that is a point maybe you could just add in your paper. And since you mentioned removal of quantitative restrictions, it's for the sake of completeness, it's important to point out that while India was required to remove quantitative restrictions, that exercise was complemented with a very important complementary development, which was related to the agriculture sector, that is negotiations for raising bound tariffs in agriculture products. So while we remove quantitative restrictions on large number of products, on some products we renegotiated and raised our bound tariffs so that we could raise the applied customs duties as well on them. Of course, these were confined to just agricultural products, and these did not directly impact the industrial sector. One interesting point I had, not directly related to your research, but which can have a bearing on your research. You mentioned about ASEAN and some of the other FTAs having a negative impact. Now, normally there is a presumption that when India concludes an FTA and starts implementing the FTA, because of reduction in duties, the importer is able to source the inputs at a lower price. So to test this question, at some point in time, I had done a unit value analysis of imports from ASEAN. And we came to a very unambiguous conclusion. And I'm sure you can replicate the exercise as well. A very large percentage of products on which tariffs were reduced, the unit values from ASEAN actually went up. So what really was happening was that the advantage of tariff reduction did not flow to the Indian importer, but that advantage was pocketed by the ASEAN exporter. So that should be a bit of a cautionary note before we say that because of FTAs, imports became cheaper. That may happen, that may not have happened. There is nothing axiomatic to say that, well, because of the FTA, imports became cheaper. No, that is, we cannot treat that as a given. And my final observation relates to your conclusion, where you said that there must be a greater harmony between trade and industrial policy. Very valid point you've made over there. No one can question you on that. But in certain sectors, such as the electronic sector, where we've already bound the tariffs at zero, there is very little that the government can do over there. So in a nutshell, Rama, compliments to you for addressing this question head on with a bit of fine tuning. It will be a very, very valuable piece of research coming from you. And I look forward to the final paper in publication. So compliments to you once again, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Das, for your insights and comments. At least three points that I could sum up from your discussion are, the first one is most interesting, where you link up the UVs, the unit values, to the import surge, elaborating that it depends on the elasticity, income elasticity of the item. If it is on textiles, it may not matter. A change in unit values may not be as sensitive as it could be in some high value items such as automobiles. The second observation was regarding a sharp differentiation between import surge and serious injury. A third point that you highlighted was regarding the stickiness of the import to output ratios, which has stayed around 0.4 for a while, which actually indicates well that it is not entirely the imports which are causing the damage. We also need to take a proactive action within ourselves. We need to set our own house right so that we can meet the demand in-house. With that, I thank you once again, sir. And without a loss of time, I would now like to invite Professor Saikat Sinha Roy as our second discussant in the panel today. So a few words of introduction are mandatory before I give you the floor. So Professor Saikat Sinha Roy teaches in the Department of Economics at the Jadavpur University in Calcutta. Prior to that, he has also taught at the Department of Economics at Calcutta University and at the Presidency College, Calcutta as a faculty. Professor Saikat has been also affiliated with the RIS as a faculty member in the past. With that, sir, I invite you for your discussion on the presenters, on the author's paper today.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can see you, we can hear you.
I have a presentation. Can I share the screen?
Sure, sir, my IT would
Okay.
enable that.
If they can enable that, that will be very nice. Actually.
Is my IT hearing the request from?
It's enabled. Sir.
Sir, you have the rights. Please
Okay,
go on.
Okay. I thank Dr. Anjali for giving me the floor, and to ISID, especially Satyaki and Nagesh, for inviting me to this to discuss this important paper. I have some comments, and before and I hear that it's a work in progress. So I hope Rama would take the comments to make it a more robust paper, as Abhijit was saying. My comments, given my comparative advantage, would be mostly towards the methodology of the paper and the conclusions which Rama is arriving at. Now let me start presenting it. The paper by Rama is an important contribution, and as it does an important impact assessment of a policy initiated some 40 years back. And now in my presentation, I have underlined certain words or terms, and here I have underlined the word 40 years back. Now, what does the paper intend to do? The paper discusses the nature and extent of import dependence in India's manufacturing sector post-1991 till 2020-21, and explores how the process of import liberalization and rising import dependence has affected the industrialization process in India. This is a very, very pertinent question to ask. And in fact, after a policy that was introduced some 40 years back, we need to look back whether it has served us right in India. The database, as Rama mentioned, has, as she uses the NIC 4-digit and HS 6-digit concordance, which is itself a very painstaking process, and then mapping the trade data with the industry level data, calculating import penetration ratio to observe import surge at the industry level, and then go for an impact analysis of rising import dependence for the entire period. In addition, Rama takes into account tariffs from WTO tariff database, while Global Trade Alert, Ministry of Commerce, and other databases, they give her information on non-tariff barriers of India. For trade data, Rama uses UN Comtrade database, while ASI source has been used for industry database. Oh my God, why this is not going? Just a minute.
So click on the screen and page down. Use page down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm little technologically challenged. The methodology, as she does, the study has identified year of import surge by observing rise in imports at the NIC 4-digit level for a 5-year period, when the increase doubled or more and is sustained thereafter, which is treated as the trigger of import surge. This impact analysis is done for groups of end-use industries, including primary, intermediate consumer goods, and capital and infrastructure or construction goods. I think following the literature on structural change and various empirical studies on India, Rama has rightly used output and employment as the variables to observe to conclude on the impact of rising imports. There might be other important dimensions of the impact analysis as well, but that is not the concern of this paper. As regards the econometric approach, the study uses a balanced panel data, the effects of import penetration ratio, import tariffs, and other industry indicators on employment level at NIC 4-digit level to using a fixed effects panel estimation. Now, the version of the paper, I should mention the version of the paper which we received is different from what Rama has presented, and which she told while during her presentation. She has some new variables for presentation. What results did she get? Even though overall imports increased in the 2000s than in the earlier period, increase in sectoral imports was not uniform across time periods. Out of 124 sectors, import surge was found in 107 sectors, and which was mostly in the consumer durables, non-durable sector, followed by capital goods and intermediates. In value terms, the surge in intermediates surpassed that of consumer goods and capital goods. I would refer to the table 1. However, import dependence increased much more for consumer goods than for capital goods and intermediates, for which it remains stable. For intermediates, it remains stable at around 25% of total imports. The surge in imports thus took place in the 2000s and not to the period prior to that. The increase followed removal of QRs on consumer goods in 2000 and the WTO IT agreement since 1997, which the study ascribes to. In particular, import surge was observed for 70 sectors in 2005-2006 and 23 sectors in 2008 and 2009. Imports as a proportion of domestic production is equal to or more than 0.5 for 12 capital goods, 11 consumer goods, and 6 intermediate goods in 2017-18, for which the import surge has happened during either in 2005-06 or 2008-09. This exercise could have been done for the years when import surge took place for most items at the NIC 4-digit level, that is in 2005-2006, and we could have seen how the transition or what is the trend in import surge that has happened over the years. The regression results show that impact of import penetration is not a significant factor determining employment for most industry groups, except being negative and significant for intermediates and high import dependent consumer goods. And the study has identified which are these high import dependent consumer goods are. The study has highlighted the results of high import dependent consumer goods, even though the result is weakly significant. I would draw your attention to the word weakly because if you see the table, it's only significant at 10% level, if I am not wrong, my reading is not wrong. This kind of deindustrialization is largely on account of light consumer goods imports from China imports, as the study asserts. Policy implications are necessarily in terms of identifying industries where the negative impact is significant. There is a need for government support for these industries and protection of such consumer goods industries where the decline is larger. Now, let me get into my discussion of the paper. The first point of departure is that import liberalization or trade liberalization was not necessarily from 1991 onwards. It was from 1985, because when a large basket of capital goods and intermediate goods were on which the quantitative restrictions were removed, and these products were tarified. So QRs on capital goods and intermediates were removed since the mid-1980s. After that, since 1991, what has necessarily happened is a decline in tariff, and the pattern of tariff changes has changed over the period of time. If you can see Singh's paper, 2017 paper, we also have a paper in 2018 in the journal by Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. And if you look at in the table that I give below, that from 1990 to 2010, a little thereafter, there has been a sharp decline in the simple average tariff rates, which Rama also incidentally shows over the years. And after that, there is a somewhat reversal in the tariff rate in the after 2010, or if I am not wrong, after 2014. So you will see a reversal in tariffs thereafter. There's an observed reversal in the average tariff rate in the recent years, and in the table it is as shown in 2016. This has happened with regards to a wide range of goods, not only a couple of sectors, except chemicals and except textile and garments. For every other product group, the average tariff rate has increased, even though it has, you observe a decline from 1990 onwards. Removal of non-tariff barriers. Incidentally, the paper mentions that much of the impact has come about with QR removals or the WTO IT agreement, but nowhere in the analysis there is any impact analysis of the removal of non-tariff barriers. There is no evidence on non-tariff barriers and their removal in the paper. UNSCAP database can possibly delineate a pattern of the non-tariff barrier related cost. It would have been interesting to observe the impact of removal of NTBs on production and employment. The increase or surge in imports did vary across imported items, which the paper observes. In the impact analysis, the impact on output and employment can be contemporaneous or lagged. I stress on the two words contemporaneous and lag. In case of output, observing import penetration only for 2017-18 can be somewhat misleading. Import penetration ratios are required to be observed against surge in imports for contemporaneous effects or thereafter for lagged effect. Import penetration ratio for an earlier point of time or couple of points of time would show whether the surge increased over time or remained stagnant thereafter, after the initial surge, or it has declined. Prior to the regression exercise, the study could have presented some facts, stylized facts on industry level employment. In the paper, it was not there, but incidentally, Rama today presented some stylized facts, which is also likely to vary across industries despite a general trend of decline. Rather than using product groups for regression estimates, individual products need to be taken as sample units. As a result, the industry level nuances or product level nuances could have been observed rather than sectoral outcomes. With the increase in sample size, the usual problems of heteroscedasticity, autocorrelation can be taken care of. With regards to the impact on employment, the employment estimated model is required to include, among others, average wage in the sector, because average wage rate in the sector, because employment, the labor economics would tell you labor employment would depend also on the wage rate that is being offered. So that part is missing in the, and from the ASI data, you would be able to get the wage rate data. Various product specific and sector specific control variables also need to be included. This would require product fixed effects to be included in the model, apart from sector fixed effect and time fixed effect. The robustness of the model needs to be checked. Rama has checked incidentally using tariff or subsamples, or even if you can think of changing the dependent variable, that also can lead to the checking of the robustness for the regression results. With product specific information in the regression estimates, nuanced results can be arrived at with more nuanced policy implications. An alternate to fixed effects modeling can be the use of dynamic panel data analysis, where short-run and long-run effects of independent variables on dependent variables can be distinguished. And Rama, in fact, started with the short-run and the long-run. And 40-year is enough period, from mid-80s is a long enough period to talk about the short-run and the long-run. This is important as we can understand the short-run and long-run impact of import surge on employment. Further, an impact analysis can be carried out with reversal in tariff rates in the last decade, since using a difference in difference method. The conjecture of Chinese imports leading to deindustrialization is required to be backed up by data on imports from China. Otherwise, it remains as an assertion in the whole thing. I think that can also be a part of your robustness check of your results. If the research could direct towards productivity improvements, that's what Anjali was talking about. If we can do some homework within ourselves and ways to do that in the vulnerable sectors where there is employment decline, which can be done over the medium to the long run, then the research can come out of the short-term measures which are necessarily temporary, like mere government support in terms of fiscal incentives or protection of industries. There are minor typographical errors apart from omissions in references. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Roy, for those elaborate comments on the paper. Some key points that I could note from your discussion, I would like to state them here. Professor Roy's discussion has put some emphasis to observing some past trends in import surge. Professor Roy also has drawn our attention to the non-tariff barriers as being a more recently used measure of protectionism, vis-a-vis the traditional one, which has been the tariffs. Another thing that Professor Roy's comments talks about is to observe the contemporaneous and the lagged effect of import penetration with regard to import surges. He also has talked in different ways to strengthen the analysis to robustness in various attempts, particularly in reference to imports from China by referring to the Chinese import data. I sincerely thank you for your.
Can I say something, Anjali?
Sure, sir.
I can
Unless
share
I'm.
I can share my presentation with you people if Rama requires.
That will be very helpful. I'm sure she'll be delighted to receive it. And thank you so much for being with us. With that, I must quickly invite our third panelist for the day, which is Professor Manmohan Agarwal. I must speak few lines of introduction for Professor Agarwal. Professor Manmohan Agarwal has been a faculty at the CITD, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Agarwal has also served as the RBI chair at the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum. Apart from teaching and academics, Professor Agarwal has also worked for a number of years at the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So with that, I invite you for your discussion on the author's paper today. I see you muted. Okay, sir. You're audible.
Thank you very much, Anjali. Good afternoon, everybody. Rather than get into the empirical work that the author has undertaken, I would like to stress certain misgivings that I have about the underlying framework and philosophy of the exercise. For instance, it is repeatedly stressed that Anjali, I had sent in a presentation, if that could be uploaded.
Okay, so you want them to be displayed on the screen or on the chat box?
Displayed on the screen. Perhaps.
Okay, sir. Please start on. I just take a moment and have it done by my IT people. You may please continue. I'll just take a moment.
Now, one of the underlying principles of the analysis is that trade deficit arises because of trade liberalization. Now we know that trade deficits are not a result of trade policy. They are a macroeconomic phenomenon. Imports minus exports is equal to expenditure minus income is equal to investment minus savings. Trade policy does not affect the balance. And this is something that has been analyzed in detail because it was found that the 1949 devaluation of the pound did not improve the British balance of payments or the current account. So S.S. Alexander, in a couple of papers in the IMF staff papers, tried to study why the devaluation did not lead to better balance of payments performance. And he came to the conclusion that the basic balance of payments is a macro phenomenon, not a trade policy phenomenon. And he has a long discussion in his papers on how a devaluation by itself might affect income and expenditure and thus affect the trade. So I think that is one fundamental problem that I have with the paper. It's the same thing with the FTAs. When government has said, and some other economists have said, that FTAs lead to a worsening of the trade balance, the reason is very simple. If you have a deficit with a country and you have a trade agreement with that, both exports and imports with that country will go up and the trade deficit will go up. On the other hand, if you have a surplus with that country, then both again exports and imports will go up and your surplus will increase. That's all that happens with an FTA. It does not change the basic character of the trade. Then the author has mentioned that some sectors like apparel, gems, and jewelry have been hurt by liberalization. And it also mentioned that I'm a bit puzzled by that. You know, one of the problems with our apparel exports was the poor quality of dyes. Some of you may remember the upsurge in export of Madras cloth garments in the 70s, and then the sharp drop as it disappeared from the market in Western countries because the dyes were running. Okay. Similarly, poor quality zippers hampered our exports of garments. So when liberalization occurred and dyes and zippers of a better quality were available, it actually helped our garment exports and did not hinder them. So I was a bit puzzled by the thing. Similarly, about gems and jewelry. Our gems and jewelry exports consist basically of buying uncut diamonds from the world market, polishing them and selling them. So if there were no imports of uncut diamonds, there would be no exports. So it is very puzzling for me to understand how the author says that liberalization hurt exports. Then the author talks of the fact that a number of sectors and products, their production declined after liberalization. And the author believes that this was bad from the viewpoint of the sectors. Okay. Now we know that just because you can produce something doesn't mean that you have to produce it. We all know about the phenomenon of negative effective rates of protection, where the value added in the sector is negative actually. So GDP growth is actually benefited if you eliminate the production of those goods. So, just because imports go up and domestic production goes down doesn't necessarily mean that it is bad. In fact, in a paper which I had written with Ranjan Ghosh, we show that import liberalization in India, Granger causes GDP growth. Our economy has been foreign exchange constrained, so it has been import constrained through much of its history, and this has prevented the growth accelerating. As Saikat mentioned, import liberalization in the 80s also helped improve the growth performance in the 80s. Also, the liberalization in India seemed to be very extensive. And in fact, it is suggested that it was very extreme. The liberalization seemed extreme because the protection in India was very high. Now, tariffs on manufacturers were reduced very substantially. But it must be remembered that as a result of the Uruguay round, tariffs on manufacturers were bound at 35%. Most other developing countries had tariffs below 10%. So they did not need to do anything in order to meet their bound tariffs. But India's tariffs, as is well known, were very high. The average was 100%. So India had to reduce those tariffs. It was part of the Uruguay round agreement. So as far as QRs are concerned, again, India had over 3,000 QRs. I mean, I find it mind-boggling that policymakers thought that 3,000 QRs were essential. The US took India to the WTO disputes at redressal route, and they ruled that India had to eliminate these QRs in a year and a half. That is what led to the elimination of QRs in India, because maintenance of the QRs would have required the IMF to certify that the QRs were necessary for balance of payments reasons. This is in the GATT WTO rules, and the IMF refused to certify this because it said that trade deficit should be met by devaluation and not by QRs. Then there are two bits of information in the paper which I have difficulty understanding. One is that the growth rate increased only from 5.9% during 86-90 to 6.1% during 96-2000. But one has to take a broader canvas. If one compares a number of indicators in the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of this century, one finds very little statistically significant difference between the indicators in the 80s and the 90s. But there is a significant difference in the indicators between the 80s and the first decade of this century. Reforms take time. So, the reforms did lead to acceleration, did lead to better production performance, but it took time. Secondly, if you look at this variability in output, if you look at the standard deviations, you find that the economy had become much more stable in the 2000s. So I think that the whole exercise in terms of liberalization needs to be somewhat more carefully managed. It also notes that the growth rate of imports was much faster than that of exports. But this is what one would expect with liberalization. If you have liberalization, imports will go more rapidly. I mean, that is what Kruger found in her volume for the NVR study, that very often liberalization led to increased import deficits. The inability to finance these import deficits often resulted in the rollback of the liberalization episode. So, but it must be remembered that this is not nearly the case in India. Exports of goods as a percentage of GDP tripled between 1991 and 2000. Exports of non-factor services quadrupled, and that of labor services, namely remittances, quintupled. So the liberalization did lead to a fantastic increase in exports. And even though the trade deficit did not decrease, the current account deficit decreased. So I think I have a basic question about why this attitude that trade liberalization is bad. In fact, if you look at the fact, before 1991, India had a balance of payments crisis every decade. We had a crisis in 1957-58. We had a crisis in 1966. We had a crisis in 1973-74. We had a crisis in the 1980s. We had a crisis in the 1990s. But after 1991, we have not had a single crisis. So I think the liberalization, to my mind, has unhesitatingly been a good thing. I do not see how trade tariffs of 300% or average tariffs of 100% can be welfare improving. You would have to have a lot of learning by doing a much cheaper production in the future to justify such high tariffs on consumer goods. Thank you very much.
Points that I could note from your discussion, and I would like to share for the larger benefit, is that it would be unfair to expect that only signing FTAs will turn around the trade balance of India with its partner countries. Something else also needs to be done. You also underscored that liberalization is expectedly going to impact on imports than encouraging exports in a same order, and therefore it is not likely to impact the trade balance in a very significant manner. Also, you also emphasize that imports might go up, but at the same time, it's not a necessarily bad symptom for the overall economy. With that, we are spot on 5 o'clock in terms of our. Yes, sir. You wanted to say something?
I think the most important point that I wanted to make is that trade balance is not a result of trade policy. It is a result of macroeconomic policy. And trade policy is not going to affect the trade balance. As long as we have excess demand in the economy, we are going to have a trade imbalance. So looking at trade imbalances in terms of trade policy is completely misguided.
Okay. We are almost at our threshold of 5 o'clock. So I think the best I can do in this time is to invite the author, if the author has any observations, response, or any other comments before we close the session.
Thank you, Anjali. And I must thank all the panelists who have, meticulously read the paper and really, helped me to have a different perspective and, improve upon the outlook of the paper. So just few responses for Abhijit sir. He had mentioned why the import-output ratio that I took was 0.5 and above. So there's been no reference for finding a filter to that in the literature, but a 0.5 import-output ratio would mean that around 50% of the domestic manufacturing is being sort of having a competition from the imports. So that's where I thought, 50% can be a threshold, and no other, explanation, because, that can be a, sort of thing for further research and justify the use of that threshold. The second is, and I think that is emanating from Manmohan sir's comments also, and that the impact of import surge, if at all it happens because the domestic capacity is not enough to cater to the domestic demand, and that is being fed by the rise in imports, which is bound to happen when trade liberalization occurs. But the point is that beyond that, the impact on industrialization process itself, in terms of the parameters, domestic parameters, and the performance of the industries, which was affected. And I would urge that, reiterate this point, that it's not entirely, cannot be painted across all industries. So there are subset of industries which might have, which have actually gained from import liberalization, which has been pointed out by all the panelists. And therefore, per se, import liberalization is not a problem in hand. But the import surge that occurred, and certain set of industries which have been adversely affected in terms of the domestic production going down. And there are examples, sectoral studies which are being done for very sort of very particular products and sectors. For the examples I've given in the paper also. So they have come up with the evidence that there has been an adverse impact on industries. So not because just because of the domestic capacity or the macroeconomic factors which are in play. Yes, they are at play, but the trigger for certain industries, for certain products, was observed in sectorally, if we look at. And it is this subset which has been observed, mostly having presence in the consumer goods industry. So that's why the classification helped me to understand and bifurcate and separate out the effects. So there is definitely a need for industrial policy going hand in hand with trade policy, because I think I'm not asserting, or I'm not very sure, but it is the lack of mixed strategies that actually sort of unraveled in terms of some of the industries losing out due to the surge in imports. So there was a kind of lack of readiness for some sectors which would have been identified, which could have been identified. For example, the QR removal, for example, the multi-fiber agreement, or the ITA. So, the choosing of these sectors for opening up was somewhat a sort of given thing, and one could foresee. But the readiness in terms of industrial policy is what was lacking. And we have the other examples like automobile sector, pharmaceutical sector, where targeted approach, targeted policies, laying down barriers for the inputs and for the finished products, and removing the barriers to the inputs, actually helped the industries to grow and set an example of a successful success out of the trade liberalization process. So this was an attempt to look at the impact that we have always read in terms of the macro effects, because the heterogeneity of the industries needs to be identified, needs to be addressed and taken into account when we study the impact not at a very macro level or aggregate level. So that is the intention why, and the suggestions and the inputs that panelists have given, I would go through them and really work on that. And I think that would be one thing. But I needed some clarification from Dr. Roy, Dr. Saket Roy. So thank you for the the comments, which I'm sure you will share, and I'll work upon it. So the individual products specific effects that you were mentioning, either you can just clarify that here, or we can take up bilaterally. But if you're talking about products, one needs to understand the data, the problems that the data already has posed, and which some of it I have tried to overcome. So, that would be another value addition for me. If at all the product level analysis or product level effects can be incorporated in my estimation. So some clarification I would require from you.
Can I intervene now?
Yes, sir, please. And actually, I wanted to request you, because we have a lot of PhD scholars on our panel, on our list today. So it will benefit a lot more people.
Yeah, no, why I say this is because many of your results, if you look at the regression results, you would see that most of them are insignificant, the coefficients, and if you have, and your the data set is limited to the number of sectors that you are using, the product groups that you are using, so if you further disaggregate them at the product level, at the NIC 4-digit level, your results might be stronger. That's my hunch, because a lot of the data problems that happen with smaller data sets that get dissipated when the data set is larger, so that was one of my major concerns. And I know the data problems, that the task of mapping trade data with the ASI data is itself mammoth, and then arriving at the employment estimates, it is another ball game altogether. So I think that should be the first step, that if you have NIC 4-digit level calculate, you have the employment figures for the NIC 4-digit level, and then you do the regressions, because all your other parameters you would have at the NIC 4-digit level. That was my concern. Then you will have more nuanced results, and you can control for product specific fixed effect. You can control for sector specific, whether it's consumer goods sector or capital goods sector or intermediates, because the pattern might vary across sector other than products, and over time also, because there is a definite, because the surge might immediately impact on the employment level, or it might have a lagged effect, and the time fixed effects might also take care of that. So that is why I was saying that if you can do it at a more disaggregated level, then you can come out with nuanced results. And not that you will not have for the product groups, but you can also have from that itself, from the results at the product level, you can also arrive at consumer goods, capital goods, and intermediates, but the results will be robust and stronger. That's my hunch with your results, because the degrees of freedom will be larger, your sample size will be larger, and if you go by the statistical parameters, then it will conform to normality almost if you have a larger data set, and that can take care of things.
Thank you so much, sir.
Some clarification I have been able to give you with this.
Thank you.
So Rama, are you done?
Yeah, just I'll want to.
One more thing, Anjali, can I intervene?
Sure, sir. Please, sir.
Actually, these days, we earlier in the 80s and the 90s, we would restrict ourselves to the product level analysis. Now there are econometric techniques microeconometric techniques which allow you to do more disaggregate level analysis and come up with more nuanced results. I think you should do that so that your results are never questioned because of the kind of treatment you have done. That's the whole point. So that will make your results more robust.
Thank you. Thank you for elaborating. We have a comment. Rama, were you to say something?
No, please.
Okay, so Rama, there is a comment in the chat box, and this comes from Professor Somesh Mathur from IIT Kanpur. I would just like to read it. Why trade deficits need to be dealt with tariff escalation? He says that exchange rate alignment can actually help. US-China trade war falsely applied tariffs on each other to deal with the trade deficits, and in the process, both economies suffered except having positive trade balance because of trade escalation on both sides. With that, I would like to thank our author for today, Dr. Rama, and all three panelists, Professor Abhijit Das, Professor Saikatina Roy, and Professor Manmohan Agarwal, for giving your time and your inputs into the work. Thank you so much. I can see we have a lot of participants at this hour of the day, and a lot of others might be watching the live streaming of the seminar as well. So please take care. Sir, you have something to say? That's a bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much.